Okay, so g'day everyone. We are streaming live. This is the third 100 Things Fireside, where we get an expert in a given field or area within the world of bucket lists, and we have a chat with them so that they can kind of share tips for you guys who are interested in the area of expertise for you to walk away and you can start your own journey. Now, today, the edition is script writing, a Hollywood-esque theme, and I'm very fortunate to know and be friends with a guy called Jordan Roberts, who has been in the industry for over 30 years. He's done some incredible things. Off camera, I said, well, you've won two Oscars for things you've written. He corrected me and said he's written them but hadn't personally won them himself. He's a very raw, very humble and generous human, and so I would like to introduce Jordan. Are you there?
I am here. I am here. I am here and I am humble.
How are you, buddy? It's great to see you.
Thank you. It's I'm not sure how international they are, but it's Father's Day here in the United States, and I am my son has been with me for a couple of weeks. It was also my birthday a couple of days ago, so I'm in familial bliss.
What a week! Happy Father's Day! Thank you for allowing us some time with you on such a day. We've got basically quite a few people from all around the world tuning in, whether it's live right now or whether it'll be afterwards. So we'll keep this live forever. So don't ruin anything. And we've already got some questions as well. So what I'd love to do is maybe just start with a quick bio of you. You've been in the industry for 30 years. You have done things like you wrote the script for March of the Penguins, which Morgan Freeman wrote. That went on to win an Oscar. You co-wrote Big Hero 6, an animation, and maybe one of your most recent projects that you've done is Burn Your Maps. Am I right so far? How are we doing?
You mentioned that Morgan Freeman also wrote March of the Penguins, which he didn't, but he once told me that he thought he did, but I'll get into that some other time. But yes, I wrote March of the Penguins, and he read my words impeccably.
Amazing. All right, so if anyone has any comments, obviously just comment. If anyone has any questions, please do, and I'll read them out to Jordan on your behalf. As I said, we already have a few, but to get going, Jordan, I'm always quite intrigued by, because we're dealing with people who perhaps are very interested in script writing, to people who may even have written a script and they don't know what the next step is, or they want to learn from you. So may I ask, where did this all begin for you? At what point did you think, oh, I love the idea of storytelling? If indeed that was your thought, when and what happened?
Well, I was an actor from the time I got to college, so I had no interest. I come from a show business family, and from the time I can remember growing up, I had no interest in show business at any kind. But I went to college and tried out for the school play, just on a whim, and I got called back, and then I didn't get cast. And looking back on it, the psychology of that was so intoxicating. The idea that somebody said, come, and then rejected me was just so intoxicating that I immediately dropped out of college and became an actor. And I'm only being half facetious, that there was it's so dovetailed with my self-esteem and the kind of chaos of life that I dreamed of, that I sort of became an actor that way. Did it for probably 10 to 14 years, something like that, 14 years. Quickly moved to New York pretty quickly after 2 or 3 years in my college town. Spent 10 years there. And I don't think I was particularly good. I talked about writing a lot. I did a lot of new plays. Like I say, I really don't think I was a terrific actor, but I certainly studied hard and I tried hard to succeed, but I didn't. I mean, I did a few plays here and there, okay. But I did a lot of new plays, and I constantly was of the opinion that I could do better as a playwright. This also coincided with severe drug and alcohol abuse. And I finally got sober, maybe 10 or 12 years into my acting career. And that's the point at which I started writing. I talked about writing a lot as a drunk, as many drunks do. I didn't write anything until I got sober. And things started shaping up pretty quickly. It took me a while, but that's when I realized I didn't really want to be an actor. I wanted to tell stories. And so that's how I started. And I started writing plays.
It's incredible. So, okay. So one thing that I'm not in this world, I don't really know writing or acting or anything like that. But one thing I commonly hear is both, or alcohol being something that's prevalent. But I'm glad you kicked that. Congratulations. But the other thing is acting, because when you are writing, is it of use to have acting experience so that you can place yourself in both the role of the creator and then also the actor? I mean, is that an important thing? Is that a benefit? Again, for people watching who are thinking about writing, should they also be thinking about acting?
For me, it's an absolute benefit. There are many, many writers who are not actors, and there are many, many brilliant writers who are not actors, dramatic writers, playwrights, and screenwriters. For me, it's absolutely a benefit. I write as an actor. It's basically an improvisational exercise. It always has been from the beginning. I will write dialogue. I will then act the dialogue. Then I'll act the other part. Then I'll go back and act the first. Then I'll act both parts. And it's, to be honest, I don't actually know how people who aren't actors do it, though I know there are many who do. For me, it's helpful.
Amazing. So, okay, so you were drinking, you were an actor for several years, you stopped drinking, you started writing, which is something you always spoke about when you were drinking. Do you remember the very first thing that you wrote from a concept point of view? Like, where were you? What happened to it? What was it?
Well, the first, I became a writer, and I don't mean this facetiously. A woman I was engaged to be married literally disappeared overnight, and I've never seen her since. And wow. She never came back and got her stuff. I mean, she just broke up with me, and God bless her for doing so. But I wrote her a letter, and it was probably 20 pages long. And it was the first time I remember trying to communicate something personal and deep. And I probably had done both those things before, but it was the first time I remember burdening myself with the desire to be clear. So I was both personal and vulnerable, but clear. And I remember when I finished the letter, I thought, okay, you're a writer now. And I began writing a play shortly thereafter. So that was clearly, I don't know that anyone would ever have something so clearly defined as that. But that was for me, for sure, telling this horrible person who I adored that she broke my heart and trying to convince her to come back. So again, another thing about dramatic writing is all dramatic storytelling has an impetus and a goal. Acting does as well, but writing, there's something you're trying to achieve, at least in my interpretation. And I was trying to achieve something. I was trying to achieve a cowgirl coming back from Oregon to New York City, where we cohabitated. And so that was the beginning.
So it seems like it was very authentic. Obviously you were writing to this woman, so it was very real and raw. I'm imagining, and just correct me if this is not true, but I'm imagining that's a crucial element for good writing, being authentically, emotionally vested into it, as opposed to, and we'll get into maybe the business side of writing later on in this chat, but as opposed to just writing for the sake of it. Is that an important tip for people, again, embarking on telling a story?
You know what, I would, to be honest, I think it depends on the writer. I mean, for some of us it is, for some of us it's essential, but there's clearly quite a bit of narrative storytelling, films, television, plays that are not particularly emotional, or at least not organically so. They don't have a lot of emotional integrity. There's a lot of phony writing. And some of it's quite entertaining. So I personally think it's important. I think audiences connect with the humanity of the creator of the work, he or she. The more we invest in our work, the more people are likely to connect to it. But clearly there's examples where that's not the case.
Okay, so you write this letter to this wonderful lady who you haven't spoken to since, and that catapults you into playwriting. Now, again, when does it go from something you're very passionate about into, let's say, a career? Like, was there a time where you sold your first script? Is that the right way of putting it, or it was professionally taken upon for people to act the things that you had written out? What was that moment?
Well, it happened pretty quick. As I said, I struggled as an actor for, I think it was 14 years. So I struggled, and I didn't really make a living. I made a living as a waiter, but I would occasionally work out of town outside of New York as an actor here and there, a couple times a year. So I wrote this letter. She didn't respond. I didn't get what I wanted, which was her to return. And then I started on a play pretty quickly thereafter, based on my relationship with my best friend, who had died of AIDS sort of like before we had a name for it, or he got sick before it was named, and then he stayed sick, and I cared for him for a couple of years. And he died, and he left me a little bit of money, and just enough for me to go to Utah, Moab, Utah, and spend the summer. And I decided I would write a play about our relationship. And the short version of our relationship was he was homosexual and I was not, and I cared for him for 2 years. And the play is sort of about this kind of murky line between a heterosexual man and a homosexual man who are in love with each other and are caring for each other. I mean, I cared for him.
Yep.
We never crossed that line. And the play is sort of about how peculiar that line is, and where does sex fit into love, et cetera. So anyway, I wrote this very personal play, and it turned out pretty well. It was done probably 8 or 9 times around the country. It was done in Los Angeles when I moved to Los Angeles, and I got an agent from a middle-sized agency in Los Angeles, came to this reading of this play and suggested that I might be a screenwriter. And I'd never really done much screenwriting. I'd never really read a screenplay. So anyway, he signed me, and over the course of the next year, he would give me screenplays to read. I would go to the Writers Guild library and read screenplays, and I just sort of threw myself into this new sort of medium called screenwriting, which is very particular and has not a lot to do with playwriting in some ways. And then wrote my first screenplay. It did not sell, but it was a spec script, which meant I wrote it on my own, speculative, like a spec piece of real estate. I wrote it on my own. Nobody bought it for many, many, many years, but it led to me getting assignment work. In other words, people would read the screenplay and say, we don't want to buy this, we don't want to make it, but we like the writing. Would you be interested in writing this? And so I spent 5 or 6 or 7 years adapting novels or newspaper articles or rewriting an earlier screenplay and occasionally selling an original idea. And that's how I started. And then eventually, 7 or 8 years later, someone gave me money to direct that first screenplay. And that was my first film, probably 7 or 8 years into my screenwriting.
Wow. So you don't accidentally become a writer. You commit and you throw yourself in there. And again, for people, because I'm so curious about this, as well, as I said, I have no idea about. People just have to throw themselves in. You're reading screenplays, you're reading different scripts. You are, as much as we all want to just create and I think for the majority of people perhaps watching I want to write a movie. And I could be wrong, but I know that's quite a popular one. Certainly on people sharing lists on our site. It's not always just writing a movie. There's a bunch of stuff that has to happen beforehand to give you the tools to be able to move forward. It seems that's kind of what your path was.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect the toolkit's a little different than when I started out 30 years ago. There was the tool. I mean, some of there's similar. We still have hammers and screwdrivers in there, but there's some new tools available. And but when I started out, this idea of the 3-act structure of the screenplay was being pushed pretty heavily. This guy Sid Field wrote the first couple books, and then what's his name, David McKee, Robert McKee. There's this general consensus that movies take place in 3 acts. There's a 30-minute, 60-minute, 30-minute act, and there are things that are supposed to happen in there. And so, I paid attention to those, and those are still taught. And then there's this whole other world of things like Save the Cat, which is a new book, or a relatively new book. I think it's 15 years old, that created a new paradigm of storytelling for the screen. And, these things are probably beneficial. I have mixed feelings about some of them. I feel like what they're doing is they're teaching people. They're valuable time savers, but unfortunately, I think frequently they teach people to write from the outside in. And I was lucky enough to not have those tools available to me. So I wrote from the inside out, in other words. And I wasted a lot of fucking time, excuse my language, but I in the practice of writing from the inside out, I ended up stumbling upon some of these paradigms.
Right.
And I personally find that to be pretty valuable, that I stumbled upon these paradigms as opposed to being handed these paradigms of this happens at the end of Act 1, this happens in the middle of Act 2,
sure,
this happens at the end of Act 2, and this is how we round it up. I actually came to that understanding through a lot of trial and error, and I don't regret it, though I spent many years before I wrote a great screenplay.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating, because I think we live in a time and age now where a lot of people try to reverse engineer stuff and cut corners and get to places quicker, the outside in. But as you say, it's, you were gifted with the opportunity to just have to do it the other way, so I want to kind of talk to you about process. Now,
Yeah, good.
we've got a couple of questions from Roxy and also a girl called Karina, who I know, and they've sent in questions previous. I mean, it's quite a general question, but for example, I live in LA. I live in Venice. So do you. Now, an Intelligentsia and all the other cafes, there are people all out there with their laptops. And in my head, they're script writers of some sort. I could be wrong. If they were script writers and they were each sitting there trying to come up with the next script that's going to sell to Hollywood, that's going to, create amazing experiences for people watching their movies in a cinema, what's the first process? I mean, have you been in that position of going, right, I've got a blank piece of paper, I need to fill it with something? Do you, and stop me at any point if I'm going on the wrong tangent here, but do you have to immediately consider, well, what's the point? What's the story? What are the characters? What's a plot? How does it just seems like there's so much to consider for people watching who are just like, okay, I want to start. What's the first step?
Well, I'm going to do everyone the service of skipping the part about what's professionally viable, because I don't know that I'm particularly good at that, and I don't know that I actually would know what to say to people. So I'm only going to speak to how to produce the most creative and personally fecund and exciting work.
Okay.
Right? And I'm going to make this really short, but if our friend Ty, who we may or may not talk to, there's a young man that I mentored in screenwriting, and he actually found considerable success for a beginner, which we may or may not get to, but if he were listening, he would be screaming that I should be talking about this business of the 4 hats that one has to read for creativity.
Sure.
For creativity, and I will make this succinct, but this. If you pay attention to this, this was incredibly valuable to me, and it's very, very valuable knowledge. And I didn't create it; it was passed to me, and I'm passing it on. There are 4 hats that you can wear as a writer. You can do this in any other art form as well, but writing particularly works. The 4 hats are worn in order. They are never worn simultaneously. And the 4 hats are madman, architect, carpenter, and judge. And the problem with most writers and writing, the problem most writers have with their writing and the process of writing, is that most writers are wearing the first and the last hat simultaneously. And writer's block, in my personal experience, is almost universally the direct result of judging work that should not be judged. Mm-hmm. And then we say we have writer's block, and you don't really have writer's block. You have common sense, because nobody would want to write if they were going to fucking judge what they fucking wrote the second they wrote it. There's nothing wrong with not wanting to write if that's how you treat your work. So the first step is called madman, because it's unimpeded by any particular limitations of any kind. Like anything goes. So again, I will have a general idea of what I want to write about. I try to keep it as general as possible. And then I dive in and I try to play in the sandbox of the madman, which means I write a draft that way. And it can be as crazy and as unconscious or semi-conscious or psychotic as necessary. I literally just follow the impulses that come to me. I could be writing a scene about one of the characters is on a Skype call with somebody he knows from Australia, and next thing you know, a tiger starts fornicating behind my back, and I start writing about the fornicating tiger, and then a zombie comes in and wrestles him, and I'll just go. Madman. Anything goes, unencumbered. No discernment of any kind. The second step is the architect, where you slightly impede it with just the most modest form of discernment. As architecture will teach you, there's some concern of gravity. You're not really getting to engineering or carpentry yet. You're just getting into a sense of shape, what's possible, but you're still pretty much free thinking. The third hat is carpenter, sometimes called engineer. That's the first time you're actually looking at the nuts and bolts. And the fourth draft is the judge draft, and is again, work without judgment is awful. Work with judgment too prematurely is worse. So you need that fourth hat, but you don't put it on too early, and you don't skip it. And again, if you're wearing that hat too early and you're suffering, I promise you, practice taking the hat off and you'll suffer less.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So it's basically, at first, just go for it. Be unencumbered, go for it, think big, dream big, do anything that you feel impulsive about. And then it's a matter of sort of whittling it down over the other steps.
Yep, in my opinion, yes.
Does that go for movies? So again, people watching might be thinking, I want to write the next Hollywood blockbuster. Other people might be, because I mean, there's been this rise of, I actually don't watch too much TV, but you know, Netflix and all these incredible miniseries or mini docos or whatever you call them. So the same process for any form of writing? Madman through to Judge?
I mean, yes, yeah. Well, I listen, and this is in order to create work. Once I've done my Judge draft, that's when I send it out. And once you send out work in Hollywood, and you're gainfully employed by someone who wants to participate in the creation of that work with you, it's not your work anymore, unless you're an incredibly powerful artist in Hollywood, right?
Sure.
But once I take $1 from Disney, it's Disney's project, and they either keep me or get rid of me and go get somebody else to take it. So there is constant, I'm just talking about the creation of work that matters. And then you have to figure out how you're going to be a collaborator. And I am a collaborator. I'm better than some, and I'm not as good as others. But it's a key ingredient to, if you do not want to do that, I highly recommend you reconsider work in Hollywood. It is a collaborative medium. Filmmaking is a group medium, especially from a screenwriting perspective. You are really, really not very high in the food chain in the film world. So, which segues nicely. I'm going to make this brief, but if you don't want to be a director, if you want to write screenplays, whoever you are and wherever you're living right now, I'm begging you to learn to direct and decide you're a director, because it's a much better gig. Being a writer-director in Hollywood is a much better job than being a writer in Hollywood. Film is a director's medium. You have no control over your work as a screenwriter in Hollywood. You have no control over your work as a screenwriter in Hollywood. Anyone can change it. Many people will. Television is where you want to go if you don't want to be a director, in my opinion, because television is writer-driven. About almost 15 years ago, a bunch of men and women in Hollywood decided they were sick of getting kicked around by directors, and they went to this desert of detritus and horse shit called TV, and they said, we're going to make this our medium, and they did so. And they created, we're going on 15, 20 years of astonishingly good dramatic television that is good for one reason. It's because writers are controlling the medium. And they are not allowing it to be corrupted by the person who comes at the end of the day. And now listen, I have a lot of respect for directors. I just don't have a lot of respect for all of them as storytellers. And I think the reason television is as good as it is because writers decided they were no longer going to allow their work to be changed simply because somebody had the name director in front of their title. And so if you really don't want to work with actors and you don't want to become a director, consider working in television, because that's where writers are king.
So interesting. Okay. So, all right. So you've done many films. So you clearly have the director. I mean, you've directed movies. And I apologies for the simple, silly question here, but what's the first step for someone going, okay, right, I perhaps have written a movie, or I have an idea in mind, or a screenplay, and how do I get experience as a director? I mean, what is that process?
Well, it's changing. It's, I entered this field 30 years ago. I made my first movie a little over almost 20 years ago. So It's changing. I lied my way into my first directing. I directed a movie at Warner Brothers. I lied to my teeth. It's not that the internet didn't exist, but I don't think people were as savvy about using it, because I said I directed a bunch of off-Broadway plays. I said I'd made short, I just lied. And I lied to a friend. He's a good friend. And he knows I lied. I hope he does. So lying's, it's not off the table. But generally speaking, these days, it'd be a little harder to get away with the lies I told, because there's the internet. Listen, you can make a pretty great movie on a phone. There's a movie called Tangerine that was made a handful of years ago. It was made on an iPhone, and it's a gorgeous film, and it was made for nothing. And there's no shortage of excellent films made on phones. So that's one way in which you can practice your craft. The other is you may have to write a couple screenplays and get them made before someone will give you a chance at it.
Yep.
I do find that if for new directors, it's a little easier to get a shot at directing if you've written the screenplay. I personally benefited from that. Actors liked working with the person who created the work. The man or woman who created these words was slightly more attractive than just a first-time director who came out of NYU. Again, depending on what their sample was, but. I start making short films, start shooting scenes that you write, take an acting class, go direct some scenes in acting class, learn how to direct actors, learn how to talk to them. I'm pretty comfortable in my skin pissing on the parade of screenwriting as the end of it. And I hope I'm not disturbing anyone, but I am telling you the truth. It is a heartbreaking field for many of us. Because you have so very little control over your work, and you have a disproportionately great control over your work as a director. It puzzles me why Hollywood is so enamored of directors and so frequently disrespectful. The creators of the work, the men and women who create this work, are writers, and we are not particularly respected. I've been in rooms as a director. I've been in the same rooms as a writer, and I'm telling you, it's night and day.
Wow. So so just a question to you, because this is fascinating. Why do you do it?
Well, it's a big story. I mean, it's why do I do it? Why did I do it? I did it because I wanted, to make up for the pain of my childhood. I mean, that's the truth. It's like, why do I do it now that I realize I'm not going to be able to do that?
Yeah.
There's stories I want to tell. There's stories I think that are worth telling. There's stories that are mine to tell. I also did it because it turned out I was pretty good at it, and I was able to make a good living at it. Put a son to college and buy a house in Venice, and there's all sorts of reasons. But the most compelling one and the most interesting one is that listen, the truth is, most of us spend most of our lives trying to compensate for a self-esteem that we don't have. That's my opinion. It may not apply to anyone listening. It may apply to every single person listening. But my experience is many of us endeavor to do shit so that we can finally feel like we're enough. I did that. I can happily say I think that I don't do that often anymore, because I know I'm enough as it is. I finally learned that I'm enough. I think that most of us are enough, and most of us spend way too long trying to figure that out. Having figured that out, I want to tell stories that only I can tell.
Amazing.
And that feel like are moving through me to tell. That I'm the channel. And that, by the way, I'm closer to being able to channel the story that's mine to tell if I'm working the way I described earlier. Sure. Like, I cannot think myself into inspiration as much as I can madman myself into inspiration. Huh. Right? I'm a better hose pipe. I'm a better hose of consciousness, like global consciousness, than I am a smart dude.
Absolutely.
Like, if I get out of my way, more good shit's going to come through me than I can cleverly think of.
Gee, this is like therapy. This is great. Okay, so it's all right. It's probably Hollywood calling you. If you need to get it, we've actually got a question here.
Sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you. We've got a question from Karina. The question is, what's the most...
You can hear me?
I got you. You can hear me? Well, Jordan, let me know.
My phone rang, and I'm going to turn it off now. Forgive me, buddy.
That's okay.
In perpetuity, we'll know that I fucked up.
That's Sorry. Okay. Now, look, we've got a question from Karina. You can hear me now, right? Mm-hmm. So yes. Her question is, Karina's from Brazil, by the way, and she says, what's the most common error of new screenwriters and directors? It's probably a lot of weeds to get into there, but is that something you can simplify?
What's the most common? It's so funny. It's a technology tragedy. I literally just heard an AA speaker start talking in my ears. So, what's the most common mistake a new writer might make?
Screenwriter or director.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to take the screenwriter one. Trying to guess what Hollywood's going to buy.
Okay.
Right. Talk about propelling yourself into the judge hat at the exact wrong time. I think we want to figure out stories that move us, stories that tickle us, stories that intrigue us, and sort of play with that story as much as possible. So in my opinion, the biggest mistake that many writers make would be to try and imagine what the end result should be and how the world will respond to it, and reverse engineer yourself from that place.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
To me, it does. Thanks for that question, Karina. And again, please feel free to ask anything else. It kind of propels me to another question that we had previous to this from a lady called Linda. And her question was actually mirrored by plenty of people. And it was basically she, as well as Karina, who just messaged, she's published a book, and she wanted to know the pathway, if there is, just a generic pathway, which I'm sure there isn't. But what's the pathway from having a book turned into a screenplay or movie?
It's less a pathway these days than it is a multi-lane fucking highway. And the reason is, like, original work in the cinema is extremely difficult to sell. Everybody's looking for something that already exists. So books are actually being adapted and optioned and turned into screenplays far more regularly than they used to be, because, and that's not a bad thing, especially for her, the author of this book, but there is such a failure of imagination in Hollywood, in my opinion, which is why when you open the newspaper or you go online and you look at what movies are playing, it's invariably going to be a sequel or a prequel or a movie based on a television show or a movie based on a game or a joke or M&Ms. Do you know what I mean? So it's a particularly good time. And the way she might do that is making sure that her agent understands that she's looking to find a television or film buyer for this material. So
you need an agent. So you write a book, it's published, you go and find a agent as one option.
It's probably a lot easier to do. Yeah, I would assume it's a lot easier. And if she self-published the book, that's a little harder to do. But she could certainly, if the book especially has a little bit of success, she could query agents about the book and mention hopefully its success. It doesn't have to have been successful. But like I say, a lot of agents are looking for, and all the big agencies have literary departments now who try and place literary material, both fiction and nonfiction, at Hollywood studios and television studios.
Right. Okay, so we've spoken about how you've got into this, your process, so to speak, which is really interesting. I want to kind of segue to the other side of it, being perhaps if there are people listening again who want to write something, and there are people maybe listening who have actually done something. And I'd almost like to use Ty, our mutual friend who you mentioned earlier, who I went to school with, and you were his mentor, are his mentor. And he did an incredible thing from what I understand, which was he had an idea for a script, he wrote it and sold it. First script, something to that effect. Now, I'm imagining that's a very rare story, but I think from maybe sharing just a little bit about that, people will be watching and will be able to maybe take away a few gems for themselves. Because it seems as though Ty's incredibly talented at everything he's always done, and he's a great storyteller, be it photographs, script writing, etc. When you guys cross paths, can you maybe just explain a little bit of, how you sort of helped that incredible thing come true, which was selling a script, which in the grand scheme of things is the beginning part. To what I'm understanding now is it gets very messy after that potentially. But what was that? How did you help him?
Well, he was an interesting character in the sense that he'd worked in media. He was a news anchor for a sports show, and so he'd worked in media, but he'd never worked in narrative fiction. He'd never been an actor or director or writer, anything like that. But he had this, and we don't all have this, but he had an incredible intuition about dramatic and narrative storytelling, and so much so that I remember, he moved to Los Angeles, as he tells it. I think it was the truth, because he wanted me to mentor him and he wanted to go into show business, So I knew him for a couple of years before he showed up. But when he showed up, and maybe even before he moved, I would send him scripts, and he would be incredibly facile at commenting on them and giving me notes on them and suggestions on them. And those notes from the very beginning had a kind of consciousness about dramatic storytelling. He also had a great sense of humor, and he's a really big heart. And so those talents, those qualities, I think helped him. The good news for, most of us are better equipped at cinematic storytelling than we think. Anyone raised in America or New Zealand, or probably anywhere in the Western world at any rate, is going to have a vocabulary of cinematic storytelling available to them, even if they're not aware of it. They may even have a cinematic understanding of the language, of where the camera goes, again, without even knowing it, because there's only a handful of vocabulary words that are available to us as screenwriters and directors, right? Anyway, Ty had those. And so he had a really funny idea, which I guess I'm not allowed to talk about because they haven't made this movie yet, but it was a very commercial idea, and wrote it and took it to a pretty big Hollywood movie star, and took it to my agents, and they liked it enough to sign Ty as a client. And then it went to a pretty highfalutin Hollywood movie star, and he came on as a star and a producer, and that was that. I mean, I said to him from the beginning, he sort of fucked, because it was probably not going to happen again. But it was delightful. And then then it becomes the thing I described earlier, which is it can become a very painful experience, because screenwriters, even when one of their closest friend is serving as their producer, we can't always protect the work or the screenwriter.
Right.
The machine starts moving, and suddenly, this is not related to Ty's project, but your movie about a dog who wants to, play basketball becomes a movie about a zebra who wants to, work in a bordello. I mean, it's like...
Sure. Well, I remember there's two things I want to chat about that I remember Ty telling me along the process. One was pitching, which was, again, fascinating to me. And then after that, of course, without being able to speak about the project, there was a lot of rewriting, and it frustrated him to no end. And it just seemed to be just part and parcel of what we're talking about here. How you get a story to a cinema screen. With the pitching, I remember he told me one time something along the lines of, you've got a very short amount of time to go in there and tell the story. Just tell the story, and if they like it, that's pretty much it. And it just seemed like a lot of pressure. It seemed like a high pressure situation. And I remember he had he was bouncing a few ideas or telling me basically what he had in mind, and it sounded great to me. You and him went into these rooms, and I suppose you're going into the rooms of studio execs who are looking to buy this?
Yep.
Again, for people watching, who may not be at this point yet, but I think it's so interesting anyway to know, there will be a time when you have a pitch. What's some tips for people who are going to be pitching their own screenplay, movie at some point?
Short, clear, surprising, and not read, delivered with familiarity. And as much originality as possible, and any, to be honest, as many props as you can think of. I mean, again, it is you're entering what has become a desert of creativity. And so the more, if you have visual stimuli, you can show me. If there's a beautiful piece of, I remember Ty at some point brought in some beautiful photographs for a project he was pitching, and it just, it made a huge difference to just be literally looking at these color photographs of something in nature. It was like, I get, oh my gosh. We use language, and language used to be enough. But some sort of visual stimuli would be good, and just originality, short and clear, and practice on others. And writing is rewriting, pitching is repitching. Get it down, get a good night's sleep, and come in and tell me a story.
I love it. It seems as though, another question we had from a guy called Will Horn, his specific question was, it only reads, how do you find connections in Hollywood? Now, again, that's a scratch on the, the tip of the iceberg as to probably what we need to be discussing. It's a very long one, but maybe transitioning that question into, is it who you know? Because everyone says that a lot. It's who you know, not what you know. Does that apply? Does that apply in any way to whether it's the pitching or finding?
Sure.
Yeah?
Sure, it does. I mean, Ty knew me. Ty knew me. I opened doors for Ty. So,
Sure.
you know, he had to keep them open. And they didn't buy because I opened the door. But there's no question that it was beneficial that Ty knew somebody who had worked here for 20 years, right? I didn't, well, I knew a handful of people. My mom worked in Chip, but she was long gone. So it's not that I didn't have some connections, but I didn't have many. And, you know, I'm not the most, I think I've already said this, I'm not particularly good at the schmoozy of Hollywood or Hollywood in general. It's not that I'm an artist. I don't think I'm particularly good at making the connections. What I would say is getting a program that allows you to keep track of who you have met and staying in touch with them is a really good thing. I wasn't very good at it. I paid the price for not being good at it. I signed with some new managers recently. I've been at this 30 years, and they were asking all the people I knew, and I've worked nonstop for 30 years, but I had to make a list of all the people I knew that were quote unquote fans that would help them make relationships for me. I was like, my list was kind of short. And I realized that unlike some of their other clients who would meet people, and I kind of expected, like I was I'm going to date myself maybe this is even disrespectful. I don't fucking know, but here it goes. I thought I was the girl in the relationship, right? And I thought I met them and then they had to call me. Like I didn't have to call them. Do you know what I mean? It was their job to call me. I was the girl. Woman. And I'm not going to dig myself out of that one. But the truth is most people didn't do it that way. And they had long lists because I would go to meet you, Seb, as the studio exec. And rather than waiting for you to call me after we had a good meeting, I'd write you in a month and say, hey, it was so good to meet you, Seb. This is what I'm working on. What are you working on? And that led to lots and lots of future communications. And so I would recommend that people do what I did not do, which is keep in touch with the people you meet when you meet them. How do you meet them? You know, you meet them the way you meet anybody. I mean, if you know somebody who knows somebody, write them a query letter. Most of them are going to ignore you. Call them up. Most of them will not return your call. Sure. Someone will. I would say start early making friends with the person who answers the phone, because that person who answers the phone is going to run the agency in about 5 years.
Right.
You know, it is nobody answers a phone at CAA that doesn't want to be an agent. You know, some of them are nicer than others, but most of them will say, hey, listen, hold on, before you hang up on me, I want you to know something. I'm not trying to talk to your client, your boss. I'm trying to talk to you. You want to read a screenplay? And you know what? A lot of them are going to say, well, that's nice. No one asked me that. Sure, I'll read your screenplay. And 2 years later, when they're an agent, you may have an agent.
Huh. That's so interesting. I mean, it's kind of like what many people would just refer to as networking, isn't it? It's just...
Yeah, and I'm sure there's better ways to do it. I mean, I suspect LinkedIn and Facebook and, you know, those places where you have to pay a little bit of money to meet people are probably not bad, assuming you can afford it. I can't really speak to them. I don't know. I know they're pretty popular these days, that you pay $150 and go get to pitch a bunch of professionals. And listen, if you have a good idea, you know, the good idea is going to jump, you know, so.
Okay, so with all of that said, the pitching and this and that, and knowing people, etc., and networking, and a good idea is enough. Is that right? A good idea in the first place is executed well is enough.
It has been for me. I mean, listen, everything I have because I wrote things that got me. Nobody handed me anything. And what I love about my directing career, as modest as it is it was generated completely by story. In other words, I've made 3 films, 3.5 with March of the Penguins, but, you know, they got made because Michael Caine or Chris Walken or Vera Farmiga or, you know, Charlie Hunnam or whoever responded to something that was on a page. They didn't respond. I wasn't hot. There was nothing about me that, you know, was buzzy or anything. It all happened because of the work. It all happened because of story. It all happened because of character. And there's something tremendously thrilling and uncynical about that to me. That story still matters. Character still matters. You know,
Yeah.
so a story is enough. I mean, it is enough. Thank God.
Well, I love to hear that. I'm a romantic at heart. I'm sort of I love thinking in a traditional sense. So, I mean, I think that alone is such a good takeaway for me, for anyone who's interested. If you have an idea and you're willing to throw everything at it, that's a big part of it. I've got a question here from Kale, and as we sort of get to the end of I know your time's precious on Father's Day, but Kale's in Sydney. His question is, how does an unknown person from wherever, we've actually got another question live from Karina asking the same question, how does an unknown person secure funding / convince the industry they're worth it? Again, it's a big question, but does...
Well, again, it's going to start with a cool idea, right? And a cool idea is probably not going to be enough if you're a complete unknown, but a cool idea with what we call an attachment. So a cool idea with an actor attachment or a director attachment, or a cool idea with a 5-minute iPhone movie that you made last year on this thing that's 5 minutes long, but you took the time to make it well. You took the time to edit it well. You took the time to put music on it appropriately. You put titles on it. You're delivering a 5-minute piece of work that shows that you can take an idea and sort of develop it and complete it. And if you have a 5-minute film or a 10-minute film or a 15-minute film and a great idea, and possibly you have an attachment, then you just go through the arduous process of making submissions to the various and sundry. And Australia, for instance, there's national and regional, I assume, and maybe even city funding for film projects, and we don't really have that in the United States. We have some grants, but nothing compared to Europe, Canada, or Australia. But in terms of just cold calling, you try and get it in front of as many people as possible, and prepare for some heartbreak. Prepare and take your patient pills. It's really, there's a lot of people who want the brass ring. You're not owed this. You're not owed this. I'm not owed the directing career that I don't have. I'm not owed the directing career that I wanted. I was not owed. I am not owed. I will never be owed the ambition, the fulfillment of my ambition. If it's going to happen, it was meant to happen. That's my personal belief, and it'll happen because I endeavor as hard as possible, and I get back up when I'm rejected. And if you don't think you will be rejected, vastly more times you're in for excruciating pain because you will be. Think of baseball, where I don't watch baseball, but I know that if somebody bats like 312, they're a superstar, and that means you struck out 7 out of 10 times, that's, showbiz, that's what it is. You're going to strike out a lot. And, so that's another reason why the Madman Architect idea works, because what that does is it creates a little bit of joy in the creation of the work, because you're not necessarily going to have a lot of joy in the marketing of the work. So you better goddamn well enjoy the creation of it, because the rest of it can be very painful.
So, I mean, resilience is just such an important, as you need it in life, you need it in this career choice. It just sounds like a beautiful, a double-edged sword, the beauty of it, and then also the bar fight, which it is on the back end.
But it's imperative that not only are you resilient, you're resilient in the right way. And again, this is like, I'm going to say some shit that's going to go in ears and out the other to anyone who's not 63 years old, excuse my language. It's not personal. It's not personal. It's not personal. It's not personal. The rejection is not personal. And if you think it is, you're adding to your suffering a layer that is highly unnecessary. It's not personal. There's a lot of people who want what you want. You're not going to get it all the time. It's not personal. Keep working. Keep making your work better. It's not personal.
Oh, I love that. All right, so on time, we have a question, which might be the last one, from our very good friend Tyneeve from Sydney. And he says, and I haven't read this, so I don't know, it could be anything, but it says, ask Jordan how he manages to find a way to fall in love with the stories, even when it's not his original script, or he has a producer / studio breathing down his neck. Is there a specific moment in the process where he falls in love with the process?
That's interesting. That's good. I'm glad you asked that. It took me a long time. It might even have been Ty who pointed out to me that I do that. I can't remember, but I remember fairly long into my career, I recognized that something characterized the things that I wrote, and that being that I fell in love with them at some point. And I'm not positive it was much more than, in this case, it was an unconscious decision. Now it's a conscious decision. That was a prerequisite, that I unconsciously made the decision that it was a prerequisite to fall in love with it. Because I did it, and now I do it. As I say, now I do it consciously, having become aware that that's what I've always done. And there's a lot of benefits to that. Again, especially if you can fall in love unconditionally and not expect to be loved back, which is, tough, as we all know. But if you can pull that off, love is a great space to be in. Love is everything's easier in love, and I don't think I completely bullshit myself by falling in love. I actually think being in a state of love is easier than most of us allow it to be. But I think it's a wonderful thing to aspire towards, and I suspect that whether it's conscious or unconscious, the way that happens, to answer his question, is you find the thing that's an answer to the question you need an answer to. You find something in the story that is an answer to a question you want answered, and go chase that, and go. That's one of the ways I think I do it. So I'm making sure it's connected to me. Like, I've never adapted anything for money, even though I've adapted things that are vastly, like, I've written sports movies, and as I think I already said, I know nothing about sports, and I've written quite a few of them. And so I'll just find the thing, or politics for that, or any number of things I've written, science, things I don't know about. I'll find a way to fall in love with an aspect of it. And that having found that thing, it sort of permeates out, and it makes a difference. It can create future heartbreak if you don't practice the unconditionality of love, because again, they're going to take your thing that you're in love with, and they're going to change it, or not make it, or leave it on a shelf for 5 years after you make it, or so you have to figure out the unconditionality. But yeah, it's good. It's, again, as I said, since the marketing and distribution and public consumption of your work is so frequently unsatisfying and painful, falling in love with what you do as you do it, and being gentle with yourself and free with yourself as you do it, is just another way to guarantee that there's satisfaction in what you do. Because most of us, and again, a lot of the questions that are being asked, it's not uncommon, they all have to do with some form of reverse engineering success. How do I meet the person? I'm not denigrating anyone's interest in this at all. I mean that. But most of us are thinking about how to ring the bell. We're not thinking about how to go pick the steel, and how to solder it, and what tone we want. We're not thinking about the creation. We're thinking about the acknowledgement. And I was certainly that guy. And I would never want to take away from anybody the 30 years of growth that I got by chasing this acknowledgement that I thought would fix me, because I probably wouldn't be where I was if I didn't have that false assumption that some sort of acknowledgement would help me be the person I thought I should be. I probably advanced myself considerably by that false goal. So I don't want to take that away from anybody. But I am here to say at 63, that's not what matters at all. And it never brought me, and by the way, I never rang that fucking bell. I wrote those movies, they won their Oscars, the bell never went off, because there was no bell, right? So the idea, and there's no bell for any of those people who actually got the little statues. There are very few people find fulfillment in the acknowledgement of their work. It's just, that's the truth. It's the dirty little secret. And yet we all spend our time assuming that's the case. And again, what I'm saying right now probably sounds like horse shit or gibberish to someone who's still chasing that, and I don't want to take that away from them. But the more you can find satisfaction in what you are in control of, which is your work, your decision to work, and the way in which you work, the more happy and fulfilled you'll be. The prize is not going to matter. in all likelihood, except to mom and dad. Too late.
Wow. What an answer. I love it. Thank you for being just so candid. I mean, that is, I wasn't expecting that. That's great. And a fantastic question from our friend, Mr. Neve, who, I just saw on Instagram the other day. There he is. I just saw he's writing. He's at beautiful Clareville, back of Avalon on Sydney's northern beaches, and he's writing away because he, like you, has a passion about it. And I think that's something that's just so obvious from this chat, which is do it for the right reasons. Do it because you're passionate about the art, the storytelling, because you're in for a fight, and there's no point in being in a fight that you don't really care about. It seems that's kind of a truth of the world that you live in.
Yeah. Yeah. Unconditionality. Passionate unconditionality. Good luck.
Well, on that, I will thank you to everyone who tuned in, who gave us some questions. Jordan, of course, thank you to you. One thing we won't go into, but I do remember Ty mentioning to me at one point that having a mentor was absolutely paramount to that. So perhaps that's one more takeaway for people.
Well, let me just speak to that. It's like there's a whole bunch of people my age who are looking for people to share their experience, strength, and hope with. And there's a whole bunch of people who are 30 years old and 25 years old and 40 years old who aren't asking for it. And I think it's probably always been the case. But there's a particular, it's funny, I did a workshop where I was leading this. I was doing a workshop on the Serenity Prayer in Canada, and there were maybe 15 gentlemen between the ages of 50 and 70 who were, successful entrepreneurs, and they wanted to have a non-theological discussion of the Serenity Prayer, which is the AA Serenity Prayer. And on a Saturday, in the middle of this weekend, I came into a discussion. They were all talking about how each of them had been apprenticed. Each of these 15 people had been apprenticed in their various fields. Some were in production, some were in manufacturing, there was a restaurant, blah, 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 blah. They had all been apprenticed, and not one of them had an apprentice. Not one of them had a 25 to 40-year-old interested in anything they had to teach. And they were lamenting it. And I'm lucky because not only do I have a handful of people who, because everyone's desperate to get in show business, they're willing to give me the gift of being a mentor. In Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a shit ton of people who don't want to die, so they're also willing to give me the gift of sharing my experience, right? But anybody who's between 25 or 20 and 50, and I promise you there's people out there who are generous enough at my age and older to share their experience. You just have to have the humility to fucking ask, and so do so. I mean, I'm not alone in my generosity. I'm not. It's good for me to share what, somebody said to me, used to be very depressed about big birthdays, and 30 was awful, 40 was worth, and 50 was suicidal. And I remember right after I turned 50, some guy in AA said, you want to stop that? And I said, yeah, I'd really love to stop that. He said, good. Hang out with young people. Give young people some good shit. Because wisdom is the only thing that's valuable in age. There's nothing else that's valuable in aging except wisdom. So spend some time in your wisdom. Find some people. Don't shove it down anyone's throat. Find some people that want what you have to offer. And you're going to stop feeling so miserable about being so fucking old because you're living in the benefit of aging. And I was like, dude, that is great. And at 60, I was happy as can be. Yeah. Ty was here. I mean, it was a different thing. So you're doing us a favor by asking us. Some people who say, go fuck yourself, right? Yeah. But there are plenty of people who are willing and interested in sharing what they have and what they know. But it requires, a kind of humility that is, I don't want to globalize these 15 Canadians, but these were 15 Canadian men who couldn't find a single person who was humble enough to be willing to be mentored in this post Google everything since the time you were 8 and not need any help from anyone because you can figure it all out your fucking self. Not to come off as bitter. But it's really we're living in a curious time. Yeah. And there is a self-sufficient, by the way, since I've just ragged on young people, let me just say, I've never been, there's very few things about which I am more excited and proud as an American than the young people of my country. As absence of humility or desire to be apprentices they may be, God bless these people. God bless these young men and women who are on the streets of America every day. Looks like it's around the planet, but they can okay boomer me all they want. I couldn't be prouder of these young people. That being said, there's nothing wrong with every once in a while asking for some fucking help.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, it's so interesting to hear it from your point of view, saying that it's a gift, a bit an honor almost to be able to share what you've learned professionally and personally. Because it seems that this world of writing and developing story and all that is just such a personal, almost therapeutic way of trying to discover who we are on some very deep, fundamental level. As you say, one of the reasons why you got into it was so personal to you. So again, as a takeaway for people watching this who want to get into it, it seems just very clear. You're just going to have to be vulnerable. You're going to have to get your hands dirty, ask questions, try and learn, be tenacious, jump in and do it because you're truly passionate about it. That's what I'm going to take away from this.
Yeah, right on.
Jordan,
Beautiful.
Thank you. That was so enjoyable, and I really hope everyone watching got as much out of that as I did. And I'm not just saying that because everyone says that at the end of an interview. That was great. I'm really buoyed. And there's something coming up on your screen. I'm not sure what it means, but it's the perfect buzzer for the end of our chat. So Jordan, thank you, mate, and thank you to everyone who watched.